Great. Okay, cool. Well, let's get started because we've got a lot to cover today. And just really want to thank you all for joining us today. And so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeremy Lend, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this month's Deep Transformation Live Network meeting. And so here we are in the hot summer of 2023. And as the earth boils and the news, meanwhile, is dominated by just about anything other than discussion of the underlying causes for this climate breakdown, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, right, with rage and frustration at the way our entire civilization seems to be accelerating just headlong to disaster. And I'm sure many of you experience, like me, that it's kind of a short distance from that feeling of helplessness to seeing what's going on to a feeling of hopelessness and maybe even despair. But there's another direction that we can take, both on a personal and like on a socioeconomic front, one that offers a place for some realistic hope in our future. And today we'll be finding out about one of the most important groups paving the way in that direction, the Wellbeing Economic Alliance. And I love their acronym. They go by WEAll, right? And WEAll is a collaboration of, I think, roughly like 400 organizations, alliances, movements, and individuals working towards economic systems change. And then they have a mission to change the entire debate around economic development and really create real momentum for the systems-wide transformation at local, national, global levels that we know we need, that we all care about right here at the Deep Transformation Network. And as we'll find out today, they're doing it. So we're fortunate to be joined today by three leading members of WEAll's team. They call the Global Amplification, or AMP, leadership team, with Stewart Wallis, who's the executive chair, Amanda Janoo, who heads up economics and policy lead, and Thobile Chittenden, who is their network co-lead. But before we go there, let's turn first to our own network. And as many of you veterans already know, like, this meeting is our monthly opportunity to build our own interdependence as a global community, meet each other, build our social cohesion, hear about what others are doing, build our collective intelligence together to shift our civilization's trajectory. And to help build that community cohesion, we're going to start right now going into breakout groups for just 5 minutes, just to meet each other and build a heart connection. And after the panel discussion, we'll rejoin the same breakout groups for another 10 minutes for deepening conversation. So remember, right now, just 5 minutes, just time to share your name, where you're joining us from, maybe a single sentence, whatever is in your heart, mind right now, maybe something you're caring about in terms of the topic today. And please hold space for each other. Make sure everyone in your group gets a chance to be heard. And remember, because you'll be in the same group later on, you'll have more time to share than anyway. So let's go right into those groups right now, and then we'll regroup 5 minutes from now. See you soon. Okay, great. Well, that's such a lovely way to start weaving our connections together. So thanks for engaging with that. And now let's move on to our illustrious panel here. Welcome to Stewart, Amanda, and Thobile. And let's have them, get them spotlighted. Okay, here's Stewart. How you doing there?
Okay, thanks. And wonderful to be with you all. Yeah.
Great, thanks. And Stewart is joining us from England, and Amanda from Vermont, and Thobile, welcome back. And Thobile is joining us actually from South Africa, from Johannesburg, where she gave us the heads up yesterday that they're experiencing a lot of power cuts there, but she's been preparing for this one. And so she's now joining us with a backup battery and little small solar powered light, if we've got that right. So thanks for making it still happen. Thanks for your tenacity, Thobile, so we can be connected with you. Great. And so right before we begin the actual panel discussion right now, just so everyone has a sense of where we're going to go, we're going to be basically in discussion for about half an hour, like the four of us. And then we're going to go into those breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And then in the second half, after that, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions directly or share your reflections about what you've heard. And yeah, obviously it's great if you do that by putting your hand up and we sort of see you and hear you in the chat and be part of the conversation. But if you feel a little shy about being so public and you'd like to share a question in the chat, put it in the chat in the first half, and we'll try to highlight those, and I'll try to include at least some of them in that second half. All right. And as we're having this discussion right now, we engage in something that we are sort of calling collaborative chat. So as you hear things that you think are particularly noteworthy, or you just kind of want to make a note of, I invite you to basically paraphrase or summarize those things in the chat, so that we're sort of together, we're kind of co-creating a living document of our session today. So just so you know, that's open to you. So let me turn first to you, Stewart. Stewart Wallis is executive chair. Andrew, I think we need to stop this screen sharing. Let me just, there we go. Thanks, thanks for that. Back to, where's my panelist friends? Stewart is the executive chair of WEAll and is a co-founder, and was previously executive director of the New Economics Foundation. And before that, Stewart, you were the international director of Oxfam GB, right? And responsible for their development work and policy work worldwide for about 10 years. So thanks so much for what you've already brought into the world with your work. And I'd love to begin just asking you just about the original vision and rationale for WEAll, because I imagine you came from a place where it made sense to you and others. So I'd love to hear what brought you to this place.
Well, thanks, Jeremy, and really good to be with all of you. It was lovely. It's a great start in the breakout room just to start to get to know a little bit, even three of you. So that's one of the troubles with Zoom. I can't see everybody, but it's wonderful to be here with you. Well, Joe, in New Economics Foundation, we saw ourselves as a think and do tank that had a mission to change the economic system. And at some levels, we were pretty successful. We got policies changed. We got the Cameron-Clegg coalition government measuring well-being. We worked a lot with Occupy post the financial crash. Mm-hmm. But sort of around 2014, that sort of time, we were reflecting that for an organization dedicated to change the economic system and working with others, we never wanted to do that ourselves. We always saw it as being about partnership. We hadn't succeeded in our ultimate mission. And similarly, all the progressive organizations post-Occupy, post the financial crash, we all had a sort of expectation that that financial crash would wake everybody up and actually realize we're going to hell in a handcart and we need to change the whole system. And it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And that caused a lot of soul searching. And we had a model of change in New Economics Foundation, which was do really interesting research, radical research, communicated in fun and funky ways. If you ever want a bit of fun, look at the Impossible Hamster, Google that, you'll see sort of techniques we used. Lobby behind the scenes, soft power, but also campaign with lots of allies for change and work with people in communities who are doing innovative stuff to showcase, those things. And that was our model of change. And that was fairly typical for a radical organization and what it was trying to do. But it wasn't working. I mean, we never thought it would work by ourselves anyway. It was always going to be collaboration. And so we had to do quite a bit of thinking. And we went back and said, how do systems change? And what happened? And we looked at, even going back to the anti-slavery movement, we looked at civil rights in US and elsewhere. We looked at how the Keynesians had changed, come to change the economic system in mid-20th century. and we looked at the neoliberals.
Right.
We came to the conclusion, which I think many people probably know now, but we came to the conclusion that all the things we were doing were necessary, but they're not sufficient. And fundamentally, in addition, one needed to do three things. First of all, create new power, radical collaboration across levels, across geographies, bottom up, top down, both across sectors.
Right.
And really working together. And a lot of the progressive organizations particularly failed to work together, and they squabbled over policy. They were fighting for the same funders. There are lots of reasons why it didn't happen. But fundamentally, we reckon that radical collaboration was needed, number one. Number two, that we told ourselves powerful news stories that resonated with our hearts and souls, not just our heads, about who we are on this planet and why we want to be here.
Right.
And so that's about co-creating narratives that talk to people's souls and hearts. And thirdly, democratizing all the knowledge that academics have, etc., so that if you're whether you're running a shop or you're running a small town as a mayor, or you're part of a council or a board, you've got some sense of how to change that system to the way we all believe we need to.
Yeah.
And that became very clear. And we, within the UK, we gave birth, if you want, because we used to fledge off of various organizations, something called the New Economy and Organizers Network, or NEON, for example. But that was our attempt to try and do something. But I then retired, because I was in my late 60s by this stage, and thought I'd do much more local economic work and teaching things. And basically, Brexit happened, the rise of populism in Europe, Trump got elected, and this wider sort of radical collaboration still didn't seem to be happening. So fundamentally, we thought we've got to get people together. And so I started working with a couple of groups, one who worked in Bhutan, a group of academics who are quite well known worldwide, another group in the US, helped to bring them together. Then I reached out to people who are running something called the New Economy and Social Innovation in Spain, where they brought together 40 organizations, about 500 people. And we also reached out to Catherine Trebek, who'd been working on wellbeing economy governments. And we just basically said, we've got to put all this together. That was really the start of where we all came from, that we actually, and we thought this was a mad idea. We thought we might last 6 months. We didn't have any funding. We didn't have any staff. This group of people sitting by a Scottish lock, trying to change the economic system. We thought, no, we're mad, but let's do it anyway.
Have to start somewhere, right?
Yes, you've got to start somewhere. And that's really where it kicked off from. And you'll pick up different stages that a lot has happened in that time. It's been a bumpy ride, but it's been a wonderful ride. And we see ourselves not as the experts, we see ourselves as catalysts, amplifiers, supporters, helping bring people together, helping connect, helping join up, and helping, one way you can think of it is almost, we're trying to provide the picnic basket, the picnic blanket on which people can lay out. But
I like that.
We believe in collaboration over agreement. You don't have to, all the organizations in WEAll don't have to agree on policy. What they have to agree on is a radical vision. We don't just need to fiddle at the margin. We need a totally different economic system. One that puts humans and all life together. You've sometimes described, I think, in your group as ecological civilization, and that's a good way of putting it.
Exactly. Yeah, well,
and we believe, and when we talk about changing the economy, we're talking about oikos nomos, the original Greek, how we live, how we steward the household, how we live together. And so there's lots more I could say, but it's been exciting, bumpy. To work as a totally flat structure. And we find ourselves holding two things at once. Yes, a lot's been done, but there's a massive job still to do. So we try to be very humble. We don't have the answers. We're there to support, and we try and bring a spirit of love into this. So we use that word as well.
That's great. And that is so important because, I mean, in a way, I sort of I see WEAll in some ways as being a real link between these kind of governmental policymakers and also from people leading from the heart, like a real sense of that network of love.
Yeah.
And I love the sort of metaphor of the blanket you were talking about before, because oftentimes we think of this whole, what we need is kind of reweaving the very fabric of our society. So I love this idea of this kind of blanket, this well-being blanket. And perhaps we can turn, as we're looking at the sort of networking aspect that you were focusing on, so perhaps we can turn to you, Thobile, because I know you're a network co-lead. And it seems that the networking happens at lots of different levels and layers of society, from sort of high-level policy to on the ground to communities. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the networking vision and basically how you're moving that forward?
Yeah, of course, for sure. I'd love to share. And it's also so good to see some WEAll faces in the room. And I just love the fact that we can be together in various spaces. I love the things that are coming in the chat as well. So thanks for the comments and the questions. Yeah. So I joined WEAll last year. And I think what I loved about WEAll, I joined as a member. Right. I'm part of a grassroots community in Makers Valley, which is on the eastern outskirts of Johannesburg CBD. It is a really diverse community. 60% of the community are non-South African, just various people from all parts of Africa are coming into a community.
Oh, interesting.
And yeah, a really interesting community, and asking the question, what is a good life really? And you know, well-being economy, the word doesn't really translate into every single context. And this really gave me insight in terms of, one, what a well-being economy is and what do people value. And even though it's such a diverse community with people from different cultures, languages, backgrounds, styles of communication, what we noticed through these community conversations is that the things that we really wanted, the values, the things that we aspire for, were very common. Things like sharing, things like trust, things like feeling like we have each other's back, feeling like there's equality and my voice is valid. These things started coming up and showcased to us that actually wanting the same thing. And so having that perspective and coming into the WEAll space, that's really what WEAll is trying to bring, is saying we are coming from different places, contexts, languages, but what are we actually wanting to achieve together? What are the common values? What is this vision that we have? And I think Stewart has already articulated that vision. But also then, how do we do it? And so we are engaging, like you said, in a multitude of different spaces, but we wanting to move away from just the qualitative to the quantitative. So we do have, you know, big numbers, like 400 organizations, like Stuart's mentioned. We have 15 hubs, I think, across the world. We have 3,000 citizens who are engaging on a platform. And definitely it is about momentum and movement building and increasing the number of voices speaking towards economic systems change.
Right.
But what we're finding ourselves now is actually, how do we make these connections and the engagement thereof really meaningful? And we've really started to focus on that as WEAll. So, you know, from just Anna, she is really who drove WEAll to where it is now. My colleague Anna, she's the original network co-lead, and she has just an incredible way of bringing people together in an authentic way, making people feel comfortable, safe, and really drawing out their opinions and their thoughts. And so she's been doing that for the last 5 years and has got WEAll to this point, and obviously with the rest of the team. But in terms of engagement in our network, we've started to grow as a team and thinking about different ways that we can then deeply engage. So I joined the team last year to focus on members specifically. Anna's role is now focusing on hubs. We have Simon that is focused on movements. So we're engaging with various movements, from LGBTIQ to social justice to climate justice movements. We're really focused on that, but also we've just now brought in Amira, who's focused on actually engaging with our members. And so all that to say, why are we doing that? Because we want meaningful interactions. So it's all good and well to say we're talking about these things, but actually how are we listening? And I think this is really where WEAll is at the moment. We've really started to listen more attentively. We are learning a lot more, like Stewart saying, we being humble, because actually when we are saying we want a bottom-up approach, what does bottom-up mean? What does grassroots mean? Grassroots in Scotland or the US context might be quite very different to a South African or a Kenyan grassroots community. And so in terms of engaging with members from a bottom-up approach in different contexts, we really need to listen and learn and build relationships and trust, which obviously takes time and conversation and really being honest about who we are. And so I think that also takes us to the introspection. So WEAll has started a, predominantly global north in terms of our membership. And we're really also introspecting, and we're going through a process of decolonizing our strategy as well, which has been an internal process, but we've also invited external reviewers, and really having this introspection as an organization in terms of what does decolonization mean. And I think that infiltrates into how we see these different groups that we're engaging in. So where are we going? I think is a really exciting and interesting space. We're wanting to be more intentional about understanding the context that we're going in. And I think prioritizing our local hubs is one of the ways that we're doing that.
Right.
We are obviously having a dedicated member of our team who's focused on hubs, understanding the nuances of hubs. We've just now done research in terms of understanding the challenges and the dynamics of hubs. One of the things we're also wanting to do is showcase different forms of knowledge. So I think part of colonization was saying this is the approach that everybody needs to, conform to. And we're really wanting to change that approach and say, actually, how do we learn from indigenous knowledge or local knowledge or different forms of knowledge, embodied knowledge from these different groups? And we're really seeing hubs as a beautiful platform to showcase different types of knowledge. And so we've just kicked off this year. So, you must just pause me if you've got a question.
Let me just kind of stop you there, Thobile, because I want to also make sure we can bring in Amanda into the conversation. And perhaps as we're talking, there were so many pathways I want to follow with you on from what you were saying. And one just basically has to do with that sense of, I thought it was so profound how you were saying how the connections that you're making all around the world, in some ways, everyone's so different, and then they all share. Ultimately, there's so much that we share among all of us as human beings, that sense of wanting to be heard, that sense of dignity, that sense of connecting with each other. And, honestly, to me, that is whenever I do get caught in despair about what's going on, that's why I feel that's our secret sauce, because that's what we have, that everyone, all 8 billion people around the world want the same things that we want. They want to feel connected and love and warmth. And so this other system has to condition people to not feel those things. All we've got to do is get people to retouch, connect with themselves, to find out to realize, remember what they really do want, which is what I find so exciting. So thanks for raising that. But maybe, Amanda, if we can turn to you, I do want to talk about the actual well-being economy governments and what you're doing on that front, but perhaps talk a little bit about the hubs and then the well-being economy governments, because you come from obviously the economics and policy lead, and I know you're quite engaged in that space there.
Sure. Yeah. So I think building on what Thobile was saying is, I think one of the major challenges with our mainstream dominant economic thinking is this one size fits all paradigm, this assumption that across space and time, all economies function ostensibly the same way, with very extreme assumptions, which are from a particular, let's say, cultural and philosophical sort of tradition about who we are, what our purpose is, what the economy is, etc. And so for us, as we talk about Wellbeing Economy Alliance, but we're really talking about wellbeing economies. Because if the economy is the way that we produce and provide for one another, clearly that's going to be influenced by our history and our geographies, our culture, our policies and all of these other factors. So the hubs are really important because we need change at the global level, right? That's why we need a global movement and network and connections to make space for more self-determination at the local level. But we also need people in their place, developing the kind of strategies and approaches and visions that make sense for that context and are aligned with the realities of that place as well. And so for us, we would say that the thing that unites us and all people can sort of agree on is that, we have to stop treating people and planet like they're here to serve the economy and start treating the economy like it's here to serve us. And I would say that is really sort of the starting point for the wellbeing economy governments, where we had originally, it was 3 and now 6 governments, which are New Zealand, Iceland, Finland, Scotland, and Wales, who have all developed alternative indicators to GDP that center and evaluate national progress or success along social and ecological sort of indicators and goals. So things from clean water and air to social connection, meaning, purpose, time use, trust in institutions, etc. And so this is really, I think, for us, the first step, right? Like, how do we redefine progress so that it's not all about economic growth, the belief that our progress is defined by how much we are producing and consuming, but really by the quality of our lives and of all life on this planet, right? And so that is not an easy thing, but all of these governments are going through that process of really creating a new North Star by which to orient their societies and to evaluate.
Canada most recently as well, joining. But
sorry, did I not mention Canada? Love Canada. They're the ones who include
Canada.
purpose, in their framework, which I absolutely love. And then I think, on that basis, then the next step is really about expanding our understanding of what the economy is and can be. Because I think that one of the biggest barriers we face is that, the economy is presented as the most important thing, right? The consideration that trumps every other consideration, but it also happens to be the area that's too complicated for us to understand, and we shouldn't really get involved in. So there's really intense sort of, I would say, anti-democratic implications of that. But also it's about downgrading the economy. So you get out of this process of constantly feeling like you need to make the case, for example, of why health is good for the economy, and start being able to swap that burden of proof and say, okay, well, how would we evaluate the economy in terms of its contribution to our health, right? In terms of its contribution to our social connection, in terms of contribution to biodiversity and, clean air, et cetera, right? And that's a very different relationship than the one we're in now. And it's still a journey. And then I would say the third sort of process is about, then the policy reform, right? Like, with that different North Star, with that different understanding of the economic system, how do you then use policy, which is really about influencing collective behavior in line with your collective goals, to actually encourage and reward the areas of the economy, both monetized and non-monetized. This is important, right? Like, so many of the areas we provide for one another are not, like, beholden to sort of the market or the financial system, whilst also sunsetting and, let's say, declining those areas of the economy that are actively detrimental to the system as well.
This is so great. And one of the things that I feel is so special about what WEAll is doing, is that it's one of the few organizations, but I didn't want to say the word organization, but like alliances or like sort of areas of focus out there that is looking at multiple layers at the same time. So there's a lot of talk about, the change has to happen from the grassroots, which I totally believe in. And then there's also, there's groups talking at the policy level, at the UN level or governmental level. And we know that the change is not going to come from that top down, because the vast bulk of the politicians are in the pockets of big money, and they just got that short-term orientation to get all those reasons why. But what I love is that WEAll is kind of intersecting at different layers within the system. So it's not just in one place, but it seems like some of what you're doing is allowing that energizing to follow through from top to bottom, if like let's start at the grassroots, and grassroots sort of back up again. So I really appreciate that. And I think what I'd like to do now, I'm just looking at the time. I want to make sure that I don't just kind of hog the conversation with the three of you. So let's maybe pause for right now and go back into these breakout groups for 10 minutes. And I am going to put a couple of questions into the chat just to inspire you to kind of to discuss in the breakout groups. One is, what inspires you the most in what you've heard being discussed today? And two is for each of you to think, like, in your own community, what's an entry point for changing that economic narrative, like that you were just saying so beautifully, Amanda? It's like the economy is in the service of well-being, not us being in the service of the economy. If I hear like one shift in the narrative, that's what I'm feeling is what you're describing. So let's go back into those breakout groups right now. I will, as people have gotten used to who are part of DTN now, I'll sort of hover in and out of a few different breakout groups like the fly on the wall, just to try to get a feeling for what's being spoken about. So if you do see me appear, don't even need to talk to me. You can give a little wave if you want, but I'll just be there for a couple of minutes and then fly off to somewhere else too. And I hope it's not too distracting. And let me put those two questions in the chat. And see you all in 10 minutes, and think what you want to ask Amanda and Thobile and Stewart, or just share in terms of your own reflections for that second half. All right. Wow. So many rich conversations. It's just incredible to feel into the depth of what we as a community are kind of co-creating here. And welcome back, Stewart and Thobile and Amanda. And now is our chance to take some of those ideas and reflections and all the stuff that I know I was just hearing, just one tiny little section of that, and to share with the panelists, to ask your questions. So feel free at this point to hit that reactions button and raise your hand. And in the meantime, as we're waiting for, oh, I see Daniel just raised his hand, but let me just ask this one question on that I saw in the chat earlier, is to do with somebody included mention about the Overton window in ecological overshoot. And, you know, I know, Stewart, you were earlier talking about kind of shifting the narrative and looking at the different concepts that had been so powerfully became mainstream in history. And there's this amazing concept of the Overton window, which was actually defined by a neoliberal, one of the people who did shift the Overton window. It's this idea of what is available in sort of mainstream discourse on a particular topic. And what the neoliberals did so powerfully was to shift that Overton window. And I wonder to what extent you feel that's kind of what you're doing, is shifting the Overton window around the discussion of economics.
Yeah, I mean, should I kick off, but Amanda, Thobile add in? Yeah, absolutely, we are trying to, but interestingly, when you were mentioning the neoliberals, and the neoliberals were brilliant, you know, their whole focus where they tried to shift it was this concept of liberty, and using various, you know, very much still, if you go to any neoliberal organization, you hear four chants: freedom of the individual, free markets, whatever they are, that's a different subject, strong defense, small government. So those four concepts have been very much what they push out all the time, and they help. But the thing that why we're adopting a slightly different approach, they took an elite strategy. So they built up very elite think tanks. They got big funding from American billionaires like the Koch brothers. They took over university departments. They affected case law, they focused on very much on elite strategy powered by money and powered by influence. That's not we can't do it that same way, and we wouldn't want to, for all the reasons we've spelled out. The change we're looking for is going to need radical collaboration amongst thousands of organizations and probably millions of hearts and hands. It's not a majority, but it's enough people in all their different places who believe things are wrong, want radical change, and are prepared to work together. And so we're very conscious that it can't be the same sort of strategy to shift the Overton window. It's got to be one that's much more people-powered, if we want to use a simple term, and much more love-powered. But we believe that the narratives we're talking about are much more about who we are as people. And that's a strength as well. So those are going to be some of the things that will shift the Overton window.
And let's bring some other voices into the conversation now. Maybe Daniel, do you want to join? Be spotlighted and ask a question or share a reflection. And I just want to point out, by the way, I'm seeing a number of hands out. So just a reminder to everyone, when you're asking questions or whatever, say what you got to say, please, but make sure to keep space for others so that everyone gets to have a voice.
We got to be brief as well, right?
Yeah. I was listening up when you, Amanda, were talking about that you wanted to shift the conversation from the qualitative to the quantitative. And I think this is a very kind of like a core change in how I see we relate to each other is the quality of relationship. And we talked in our breakout group a little bit about that. And for me, this is a very deep and essential conversation because I come from music and in particular also free music. And one of the things I observe all the time is the habits, the cultural, the historical, the traditional habits, all of that sort of clashing when we try to make free music with each other. And you can absolutely experience the limitation of the depth of connection that's allowed. And there's literally almost like archetypal representations that are always coming up in different people of our world culture, how it expresses itself in a fear of real deep connection, of an opening to a connection that really shifts us in our own self-perception and somehow moves us to a more future self that I feel, like a self that's already seated, but it lacks the energy, the aliveness to be really fully turned on. But when I try it, then I get all this backlash. Every time you try that, it is amazing with how precision that backlash will detect any attempt to go in that direction. So I'm very deeply interested in the qualitative change, because I think a small group of people who really jump to a much higher degree, sorry, I'm done in a moment, can cause like such more ripple effect than always talking about, oh, we need more people, we need to build the movement.
Yeah.
So, but again, I think it's a balance. Thank you for allowing me.
Thanks. And I don't know if Amanda or Thobile, if you wanted to share any reflections on that.
Well, I think Thobile, you made the point around the qualitative to quantitative, so you go ahead.
I love that you brought up the music, because one of the tests that the IDGs, so the Inner Development Goals, they brought a whole group of people from the majority world together, and they put a demonstration of musicians that had never met, and then brought them together, and they spent a couple of days together. But the whole point of the experiment was to really see the inner work that needs to be done in order to create music, right? So at the beginning, when they'd never met, the music was all sorts. At the end, when they had learned one another, understood who each other is, knew their names, knew their stories, could trust one another, that's when the music, like there was no egos, humility, all these things contributed to working together in such a beautiful way. And so this is really important in terms of movement building. And if we, I think somebody says, in the chat, how do we collaborate? This inner work is really important. And I love the way Jeremy's, facilitating these spaces and bringing us together, and the breakout rooms. All of these things are intentional to really connect all of us. And I think this is why it's so important that we're not bullying people into understanding what economic systems changes. It's like what Stewart was saying, how do we bring thousands of people together? It's qualitative work that is needed, because we really need to dig deep and understand who these people are instead of just what they can bring.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Thobile. Love that. So and that whole music analogy is so powerful. And just want to thank Niall for putting in the chat a link to the inner development goals there, which is another great movement that's taking place. At some point in the future, we'll ask that group to come and talk about what they're doing here. But it's something really worthwhile exploring on that link. And let's turn to Pankaj. If you want to join the group. Hey there, Pankaj.
Yeah. Hello. So I have a question for the Amanda. So you discussed that is the alliance of the government who is working towards the well-being economic. So there are 6 countries which are participating in. So do they change the policy at national levels, or do we change the business models? What Jennifer Hinton discussed, that moving from profit and growth to not for profit. So how it works? It's work at a corporate level, or it's work as a government levels? So changing GDP to the gross happiness index. So because the corporate is actually the country has controls on their peoples, but the corporate is the multinational corporate. So they have the alliance, they have the networks, global networks.
Great question.
So
how does it work basically at the top level? Yeah, thank you. And Amanda, you want to speak to that?
Yeah. So first of all, love Jennifer Hinton. So amazing. And I should say, there's 6 governments and they're all in very different sort of phases and journeys. So I would say at the bare minimum, it's what you're saying. So it starts with, a movement from just GDP to something like gross national happiness, or, in Canada, it's called their quality of life framework. In Wales, it's called their future generations sort of goals. I would say, Wales, for me personally, is the furthest along, in the sense that they went through a process of asking their community, what kind of Wales do you want to leave for your children and grandchildren? But it wasn't just about, setting those goals, these 7 high level goals, but recognize it requires also a different way of working. So systems of governance reform, to recognize that we're moving, we're in a paradigm shift that's moving from a very linear and mechanistic and siloed way of thinking and doing things to more integrated and holistic. So their principles are about long-term thinking, which is not very common in most governments. They think in maybe election cycles, but a lot of times just annual budgetary cycles. Around preventative thinking. So governments are stuck in this cycle of just growing the economy so they can take some of that wealth through taxes to fix the damages that are done to people and planet in the process. And so rather than just staying in that, moving upstream and really getting the economy to do more of the heavy lifting, in terms of, in Wales, for example, they wanted to build a big motorway, and they had to make the case for how it would contribute to their 7 well-being goals. And they couldn't make the case for it making a healthier Wales or more equitable Wales or a more resilient Wales, etc. So they put a freeze on new motorway spending. And I think there's some people I saw here from Wales, so you'll correct me if I'm wrong, for 3 years, I think. So they could take that money and use it towards active travel and public transportation instead, right? And so it's, it's a journey. Do I think that any of them have what we would call a well-being economy? No. Yeah, but they are on a journey of redefining progress, of having that ambition around systems change. And in Canada, for example, they're now working to transform their budgetary systems so that fiscal policy is not just about maintaining growth and, certain sort of deficit spending, et cetera, but is really about impacting those well-being dimensions that they have identified through like participatory process. So you can give other examples, but those hopefully
That's
will
great.
suffice for now.
Yeah, that's such a great example from Wales, like, because we really see there how principles from those kind of established, those seemingly abstract, actually affect stuff on the ground in a powerful way. So yeah, thanks for that, and thanks for asking that question, Pankaj. And let's turn to Barbara. And I'm looking at seeing the number of people in the line. So let's really keep each of our questions nice and concise right now, so everyone gets a chance for a voice. Hey there, Barbara.
Much appreciated, Jeremy. And you folks from WEAll, you're doing an excellent job. I have huge respect for you. I'm going to talk about timescales. Now, you just talked about, Amanda, about long-term thinking. Unfortunately, we are now in exponential collapse. So long-term thinking is extremely tricky. Now, where the data, ecological overshoot data, is telling us that sustainability, we passed sustainability back about 1925, when the population was about 2 billion. At that point, we were using about half the resources available on Earth. Once we exceeded that, then the insect population started to decline steadily, and
Can I just interrupt, Barbara? I think pretty much everyone here knows some of that backstory. Do you have a particular question about that for Amanda and Thobile and Stewart, so they can?
Thing is, Wellbeing Economy Alliance are now mopping up lots of terrified people who are waking up to a reality that they didn't expect to wake up to. Now, I'm saying having a shoulder to cry on is extremely important at this point in time.
Right.
But they also need a vision that will point them in a helpful direction. Now, having 50 measures of well-being is very difficult to work with. A simple measure saying we need to shrink global GDP to a quarter of the level that it is if we want to ever be sustainable again, that is a very simple concept that could help to focus minds on what we need to achieve. So that's—
thank you for sharing that. Yeah, great point. Amanda, Thobile, Stewart, anybody want to answer? Let's just have one.
I mean, I could just say quickly, nice to see you, Barbara. So I would say very much like the degrowth movement is an important part of the picnic blanket that Stewart was alluding to. And that is very much within the types of, I would say, movements and framings of a lot of the actors within the space. And so whether or not it's about focusing and still holding the aggregate index of GDP, or being a little bit clear on what are the aspects of the economy that we really want to decline, I think, is a question, and even within the degrowth movement. But agree with you that this is not just about, it's partially, you need to be clear that there's a different economic system and it's possible and we can work towards it. And that part of that is also about sunsetting or hospicing the aspects of our current economic system that are so exploitative and damaging to people and planet.
Well, yeah, thank you, Amanda. And thanks for raising that point, Barbara. And on to Alain. You want to?
Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, I welcome this opportunity to understand more what WEAll is about. And I was wondering, that's a question to anyone in the panel, how much indigenous thinking is actually taken into account? For instance, questioning the very individualistic and materialistic way of approaching life and the definition of what is a good life, because that affects every one of us. So can you say more about that? Because that's what I'm working on with a bunch of elders, saying, well, how can we actually move more in that direction? Not that indigenous has a response for everything, not at this time, but can you say more?
So I know I just spoke, but do you mind, Thobile, if I use this as a shout out for our Global Wellbeing and Economy project?
Yeah, do that. That'd be great.
Yeah, do you mind?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you raised this question. Because first of all, I want to be really clear also that, for us, we recognize that this idea of like a well-being economy or of like holistic collective well-being is not new. It is not our own. It emerges from indigenous traditions around the world and is still like, in alternative development paradigms like Buen Vivir and Ubuntu, Swaraj, and many more. And one of the things that we've been working on or just starting, so I would love to have you engaged in some way and anyone else, is actually about at the global level, we realize that we need real reform around our global economic architecture and governance systems. But the thing is that anytime we engage in these discussions, our imaginations seem to be pretty limited to traditional categories of like trade, debt, finance, intellectual property, etc. Right? And so we're like, we need to start from a totally different first principle. And so we're bringing together different indigenous thinkers, more radical sort of post-development thinkers. People are really thinking from a different worldview and a different starting point of what connects us across space and time. How can we produce and provide for one another on this earth? And as a starting point to think about what are the kinds of reforms needed in our global economic system in order to facilitate and make space for more relocalized, balanced, and equitable and sustainable economies, right? So if you'd like to be engaged or you have suggestions of people, we're really early on still doing interviews to really identify, how we can amplify those voices and then use it as a way to bring together our movement to collectively advocate towards those much more radical, hopeful, and types of transformations.
And linked so closely to that, a journey we've been on is really moving from what was initially quite an anthropocentric view of the economy to a much more ecocentric view of the economy, which we increasingly don't just talk about human dignity, we talk about the dignity of all life, the common good of all life, and how we're intricately connected to all life, and which very much comes from indigenous knowledge and wisdom as from other groups as well. But that's a journey we've been on and still very much are on at the minute.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. And let's turn to Robert. And maybe now if we can just keep our questions to like one sentence or two sentences max, because I want to see if we overrun for a few minutes, are the three of you panelists able to?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. So, because I'd rather overrun and let people have a chance to talk. Okay, Robert. First, we've got to get you off mute there, Robert.
I'm sorry. Jeremy, I'm afraid I'm capable of some pretty long sentences. But anyway, taking what Barbara said as context and my, I don't know what to call it, pleasure or joy or whatever, with hearing such great creative ideas as the panels expressed today and the actual programs going on, which Barbara referred to as long-term. I think they're long-terms that they're going on now. The problem, however, I'm torn between my great enthusiasm for all these developments and creativity and the fact that we are in an increasingly urgent situation that calls for stopping a lot of things that are going right now. And I am at a loss, frankly. And I think without wanting to give up anything that we're talking about here, how do we deal with the fact that the purveyors of the status quo, if you will, are still going on at it as always?
Yeah.
I know it's not a simple question.
Anybody want to give a shot to that?
I still think it comes back to power, and that's why all the time we really believe that we're not going to shift things. We're not going to stop the things that need stopping, because I think we can actually identify, it's madness in the UK starting up new oil fields and licenses, or even exploiting the existing ones. Crazy. So we can point to some absolutely clear things that just shouldn't be done, but it requires that collaboration. And that's why we're reaching out to movements, for example, because we don't believe just a group, even if we expand hugely, that a well-being economy grouping and with hubs and people operating at all sorts of different levels can do it on its own. It's only when the people who are talking about climate change, not system change, can articulate what that system change is. It's only when they're part of together with similarly the different faiths around the world, the interfaith groups. We need all those movements. We need those thousands of organizations and millions of hearts and hands collaborating, because that's the way we're going to stop things. Because we can be clear the whole issue to me It's not what needs to be done. The what is clear. It's what has been blindingly clear to many of us for many years. I know it's different what in different places, but broadly speaking, we know the things that need to be stopped.
Mm-hmm.
The key question is how. And the only route we can see, and that's why everybody's got a place in this, whether it's just stop oil through to the people working more on the inside with the wellbeing economy governments and the people pressurizing governments from within. So it's that radical collaboration, and it's not simple, but we've got to keep building this power.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Yeah. So great question, Robert. And I want to acknowledge that we usually schedule these things for 75 minutes and we've kind of hit that time. But if the panelists have the time, I appreciate the generosity. Let's go through these final questions. And of course, if people need to leave early, then farewell. But hopefully, as many of you as possible can stay to the end. There's such a rich topic, so important. I don't want to not hear what people have to ask. So on to Carmen. And again, just keep the question snappy, please.
You already know me, I'm a talker. Radical collaboration. So my question is, can you say a little bit about how to, or the process for organizations to join your alliance? Because I have an organization and I want to join.
Yeah.
Yay, that would be me. So we'd love you to join. I'll pop my email in the chat, but we do onboarding calls with everybody that's wanting to become a member so that we can align on values and hear what your journey's been. And that's like my favorite part of this role that I'm in, is it's so inspiring hearing what people are doing. And so that's really the journey is this onboarding call. And then we have a variety of different platforms to connect everyone together. So it's on Zoom, it's on Slack, it's on WEAll Talks, but that will be part of the onboarding process that I share with you. So yeah, and I think when you speak about radical collaboration, we're really excited for that. And I think what's beautiful about WEAll is that we love that we can connect, broader than just WEAll. And so we're not too precious, like we're even seeing our hubs, we're not precious about branding or like having to call it a WEAll hub, for example. And I think this is where we speak about the ego of having labels and branding and all of these things that allow just distract us from the actual mission. And so we're really wanting to embrace different groups, different thinkers, this whole of society approach. So it's not just people that are in economics, but we want I saw somebody saying economics must be fun. Like we would love dance teachers, if they're really thinking about changing the system, please join us. Yeah. So I'm not too sure about your organization, but yeah, it would be really great to chat and I'll share my details.
There's no membership fees or anything like that. It's just literally, we want anybody joining us who believes we need radical system change. That's what you've got to believe. And secondly, that you're prepared to collaborate with others to get it. And those are really our only two requirements. And if anybody who meets that, great, come and join us.
That's cool. And I just want to add, I've been talking with Thobile about let's set up a WEAll hub on the Deep Transformation Network as a group, so that everyone from the DTN, as it grows, new members will find WEAll right there, and we'll have a kind of a portal between WEAll and DTN going forward. So yay. And so to you, Larissa. Hi, Larissa, great to see you.
Hi, thanks. Thank you. Good to be here. My question is, maybe Thobile is in the best position to answer it. I really appreciate this vision of taking on economies. But what I want to ask about is, it's bad enough dealing with the economies that we can see, but how are you thinking about and organizing for dealing with the shadow economy, the ones that we don't see, that are really operating, pulling the strings, and overseeing our lives, dictating our lives in ways that we are not aware of.
No, I feel you, Larissa, because it feels like this is the story of South Africa at the moment. Lots of things that are hidden under the carpet. And yeah, it's really tough. To be honest, I think Amanda and Stewart can better answer. But what I love about WEAll is that we are bringing stuff to the surface. So I can speak from a South African perspective, and what's been happening with our local government is because there is this sense of frustration around what you term as a shadow economy, we just call it corruption. People are frustrated. And so they are seeking alternatives of what does more transparency look like? What do participatory budgeting, what does that look like? What does that mean? What does it mean to have citizen assemblies? What does it mean to have power back within our democracy for people from the grassroots up? And so these opportunities, when people are seeing or calling out the things that are happening in the shadows, it really allows us to speak about the systems change that is needed. So we speak about failure demand. There's lots of different things that you can find on the WEAll website. But for us, we're seeing it as a huge opportunity from a South African perspective. Even this energy crisis that I'm in now is due to what's happening in the shadows. And so as much as it's grim and frustrating, I'm really seeing it as an opportunity because governments, societies are waking up to say we actually have to explore alternatives. So this is not just seen as warm and airy, fairy, fluffy alternatives. This is seen as a real possible solution. And yeah, communities are starting it already. And this is what we're trying to show, is that it is possible to do things in the light, to do things transparently and openly. And the more of us showcasing this, we can bring light to the shadows.
And the other thing is, while we're a small team at the centre, we all sort of centrally can't do everything, but we've got we purposely foster and work with some wonderful members, people at the Tax Justice Network who are fighting for unpaid taxes and tax havens across the world. So we've got members who are fighting in the financial sphere where a lot of this corruption, and those members link with each other. So the members of WEAll are doing huge amounts. We're not trying, we're never interested as a sort of central team in doing anything that other people are doing. What we're trying to do is support that and link people together. So people who are fighting corruption in different places, again, those sort of links that Thobile is talking about, both in place and internationally, we're trying to foster those.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that question, Larissa. And Shando.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. In terms of economics, what particularly interests me is the credit union movement and the cooperative movement. The credit union movement has worked since 1860.
Oh, Shanda, let me just interrupt because we're so tight on time. Can you just go straight to the question you want to ask? I'm sorry to. Yeah.
Okay, big fun. Could the team just comment on credit union and cooperative in the mix of what they're doing?
Really important. Yeah. Thank you.
Amanda, do you want to do that, or should I say, because we used to do a lot, obviously, in New Economics Foundation with credit unions, community development finance organizations, so both in the banking sector and business. And certainly we believe in the model of business needs to radically change, whether in the financial sector or otherwise. And so cooperatives, trusts, different models of business, again, the sort of Schumacher thinking are very much something we foster. And you'll find a guide to different business organizations we work with on our website, for example. So it's part of the picture, but we never see ourselves as the experts, say, on credit unions or this subject. What we're trying to do is put the whole picture together and do all those connections. But we have members, again, who are the experts on financial reform, etc. So absolutely, they're part of the mix. And you know, that earlier question as well, we need a radical reform, particularly of the typical capitalist enterprise. You know, the whole driving of things for profit rather than driving for purpose just doesn't make sense anymore, whether it's a banking or anything. So that's that nature, the Marxian nature of capitalism, as opposed to markets, needs radical change. We absolutely fundamentally believe that.
Thank you. Thanks, Stewart. Jürgen. And then Kevin.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. Question for Stewart and I guess Amanda. How do you see, is it best possible to change the economic paradigm, right? I mean, we manifest the economy and our systems through our mindsets, individually and collective, largely our subconscious. So how explicit can we be about it? Or maybe should we be more explicit about it? How do you see, can we best address this? Background to this question is that I lived a couple of years in Bhutan with G&H, was mentioned a couple of times. And their collective paradigm is obviously G&H and protecting the environment, which is why they have protected the forests and so on. So wouldn't the world need more of this G&H paradigm, and how to get there?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. We're trying to figure it out. Yeah, that's pretty much our mission. So again, can't say we've figured it all out, but I would say, you know, in my experience, the first point is really about demystifying the economy in the first place, right? So we need to remember that we are the economy, that it is a system we designed, and therefore it can be redesigned. We just need to be clear on what we actually want it to deliver for us. And I think that that's where your point around the G&H and being clear about what is our North Star, what are we actually trying to achieve, what matters in terms of the well-being for people and planet, like that's really, really at the core of this. I think I said in my breakout group, you know, I describe the economy as the way we produce and provide for one another. And so we need to always remember that like everything we produce comes first and foremost from the earth, and everything we provide is valuable insofar as it contributes to our collective well-being, right? And so keeping that in mind, I think when you're talking with people, asking them what they love about where they live, it's always going to be people and nature, right? And so why don't we center this, understand, downgrade the economy, challenge the conceptions? I think that that's a powerful way to sort of start.
Thanks, Amanda. And thanks for the question, Jürgen. So our final question, Kevin. Hey there, Kevin.
Hey, so thank you for a great presentation. I really got a lot out of it. I enjoyed it. My question is this, and it's a practical one. I've been working locally for a number of years, and I found there are a number of broadly allied organizations that are overworked and understaffed. And you talked about building coalitions. And so my question is, how can you get these different disparate organizations that are environmental, that are climate, that are focused on the seas, environmental justice, social justice, economics, educational, agriculture? How can you, in your practical experience, what are the first one or two things you can do to build stronger, more cohesive, and more dynamic collaborations in order to get things accomplished on either local, regional, or global level? But I'm thinking locally for myself.
Yeah.
And I'll be any of you who have something to say about it. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a really important question, Kevin. And I think that it's one that we would love to be in more dialogue about as well. And something that we think about, you know, how could we, for example, like better pool our communication capacities, right? Like so many of our teams are dealing with comms or even around fundraising, right? Like are there ways in which so much energy is taken around this aspect, but we could align more in those core organizational aspects? I would say that's still a part in a journey that we're on. I can just say, Stewart mentioned very briefly, just from our own little organization that we have at Global, My favorite part is that we are a flat organizational structure. We don't have hierarchy. And I have to say, as somebody who hates authority, this has been very important for me. Yeah. So it's like you have autonomy for your individual space, but you also have support and can do a lot more than you could alone. And I think that principle of not trying to fall back into a traditional hierarchical sort of structure, there's something there about how do we create more organic forms of empowerment and collective collaboration across the different spaces. But if you have ideas or would like to also engage in this dialogue, I think this is a lot of what, Amira and our team or ourselves, working with Thobile can probably speak to this.
It's a big issue really of how do we bring all these different groups together at the different levels. And we're still experimenting, learning, listening. But increasingly, I think in the past, a lot of groups have spent a lot of time, and funders have done a lot of time mapping lots of different organizations. That can be useful, but actually what matters is not what it says on the tin about the organization. It's about who has got energy to play what role. And we need teachers, we need pollinators, we need the people on the ground doing things, the farmers, if you want to use those sort of analogies. We need the storytellers. We need to start thinking about both the different roles we need for this change and where the energy is and how we bring that energy together to create exothermic reactions rather than endothermic ones.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. And let's wrap up now because we kind of overran, which is a testament to how much enthusiasm you have brought into our community here. And I so appreciate it to all three of you, Amanda, Thobile, and Stewart. And just as a reminder to people, so often on the DTN, we have these conversations, people say, yes, but let's talk about action. And the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is actively recruiting new members. We can, you can become a spokesperson with them, become a trainer in the wellbeing economy. There's opportunities here for anybody who wants to take that next step. So I'm really looking forward to getting a group started on the DTN, so it'll be easy for people to stay connected. And just as a reminder to people, we started this process that 2 days from now, on Thursday, we're going to have a follow-on monthly dialogue session on this topic of what came up with today. It's going to be hosted by Sylvia Holland, Miriam Luther, Sigrid Anderson, and Galia Ronen on the themes of today. So let me just put that in the chat, the link, so people know where you can sign up and RSVP to that. And then finally, just want to say that next month, the last couple of months, or a few months actually, we've been turning outward at the DTN to all these incredible networks, such as the Wellbeing Alliance, to find out more about them and connect with them. And next month is our turn to turn our attention inward. And it's basically been 18 months now since our network began. We've grown to over 3,000 members. And we've been having discussions with the moderators group about how we should be cultivating and directing the growth of the DTN so we can most effectively contribute to this whole broader movement of WEAll and all the others for real transformation. And should we be focused more on action initiatives or collaboration with other networks like WEAll? How can we encourage more cultural, ethnic, geographic diversity in our membership? But the DTN is not about top-down hierarchical decision-making, just like you were saying about WEAll. We're a self-organized network. And so we need to be able to see ourselves as a collective system. So in the next week or so, we're going to be putting out a survey that I really hope everyone on the DTN will take a few minutes to answer, so we can really see ourselves. Who are we? What do we care about as a system, as a network? And at next month's Live Members meeting, we'll share and explore the results of that survey and invite everyone on the network to engage in a conversation about our future direction, how we can most contribute to the transformational change we all want. So we'll be seeing you next month on that. My big thanks to you all, Thobile, Amanda, and Stewart, and look forward to seeing more of you in future conversations. I'm personally so inspired by what you're doing. I'd love to clone myself and join you and put my whole full-time part of me.
Come on over, Jeremy. No, we'll work together.
So thanks for it all, and let's stay in good touch. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye,
Bye,
everyone.
Bye, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.